The sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked asphalt of Willow Street, and Rosa Martinez was on her knees, scrubbing the concrete steps of the small brick house she'd called home for the past 7 years. Her hands were raw, her back ached, and sweat dripped from her forehead onto the worn fabric of her faded jeans. She didn't hear the patrol car roll up behind her. She didn't see Officer Derek Callahan step out with that smirk plastered across his face, the one he wore whenever he thought nobody important was watching. She didn't know that in exactly 4 minutes, her entire life was about to explode into something she never could have imagined. Before we dive deeper into this story, I need you to do something for me. Type your country in the comments right now. I want to know where in the world you're watching from, and if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button because this story is going to take you on a ride you won't forget. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Now let's get back to Rosa. Rosa was a single mother of two. Her daughter Mia was 8 years old with bright eyes that still believed the world was fair. Her son Carlos was 6, and he had his father's smile, the kind that could light up a room even when the electricity bill hadn't been paid. Their father had left 3 years ago, vanished one morning with nothing but a note that said he was sorry and a checking account that had been emptied down to $17.32. Rosa had cried for 3 days straight, then wiped her eyes, pulled herself together, and decided that if the world was going to break her, it would have to work a hell of a lot harder. She worked 2 jobs. During the day, she cleaned houses for families in the wealthier part of town, scrubbing toilets and folding laundry for people who barely looked at her. At night, she waited tables at a diner called Mel's, serving greasy burgers and lukewarm coffee to truckers and insomniacs until 2 in the morning. Her mother watched the kids while she worked, a frail woman with kind eyes and hands that shook from arthritis. They got by, barely, but they got by. Officer Callahan had been harassing Rosa for months. It started small. He'd pull up beside her when she was walking home from the bus stop and ask for her ID, even though he knew exactly who she was. He'd shine his flashlight through her car windows when she was parked outside the grocery store, claiming he'd gotten a report of suspicious activity. He'd knock on her door late at night, saying there had been a noise complaint, even though Rosa's house was always quiet. The kids asleep by 8:30 every single night. She never understood why. She kept her head down, paid her bills on time, never caused trouble. But Derek Callahan had decided that Rosa Martinez was an easy target, and in his mind, that made her fair game. On this particular Saturday afternoon, Rosa was cleaning the front steps because the landlord had called that morning, threatening eviction if the property didn't look presentable by Monday. Never mind that the paint was peeling off the walls inside, or that the kitchen sink had been leaking for 6 months, or that there was a crack in Mia's bedroom window that let the cold air in during winter. No, what mattered was that the front steps looked clean for the neighbors, so Rosa was out there with a bucket of soapy water and a scrub brush, doing her best to make something old look new again. She heard the car door slam and looked up. Officer Callahan was walking toward her, and there was something in his stride that made her stomach tighten. She'd learned to read people over the years, learned to sense danger the way animals sense a coming storm. And right now, every instinct she had was screaming at her to be careful. "Afternoon, Rosa," he said, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "Officer," she replied quietly, not meeting his eyes. She'd learned that too. Eye contact could be interpreted as aggression, as disrespect, as an invitation, so she kept her gaze down and kept scrubbing. "You know," Callahan said, leaning against his patrol car, "I've been getting complaints about this property, people saying it's bringing down the neighborhood." Rosa's jaw tightened. "I'm cleaning it right now, officer. That's what I'm doing." "Yeah, I can see that," he said, and she could hear the mockery in his tone. "But you know what? I don't think you're doing a very good job. In fact, I think you're making it worse. All that dirty water running down into the street, that's a code violation." She looked up at him then, confusion flickering across her face. "I'm just cleaning the steps. There's no law against that." "There's a law against whatever I say there's a law against," Callahan replied, and the false friendliness was gone now, replaced by something cold and ugly. When he walked to the back of his patrol car and opened the trunk, when he turned around, he was holding a coiled garden hose. Rosa stood up slowly, the scrub brush still in her hand. "What are you doing?" "I'm helping you clean," he said, and that smirk was back, wider now, meaner. He walked over to the spigot on the side of her house, the one she used to water the tiny patch of grass in the backyard, and attached the hose. The water came on with a rush, and before Rosa could process what was happening, Callahan turned the nozzle toward her and squeezed. The blast of water hit her square in the chest, so hard it knocked her back against the steps. The cold shocked her system, stole her breath, and for a moment she couldn't do anything but gasp and try to shield her face with her arms. Callahan was laughing, not just chuckling, but full-on belly laughing, like this was the funniest thing he'd seen all year. "There we go," he shouted over the sound of the rushing water. "Now you're really getting clean." Rosa tried to speak, tried to tell him to stop, but the water was in her mouth, in her nose, and all she could do was choke and sputter. She could hear the neighbors coming out of their houses, could hear voices shouting, but Callahan didn't stop. He sprayed her up and down, soaking her clothes, her hair, the steps she'd just spent an hour scrubbing. He was having the time of his life, and then something inside Rosa snapped. She wasn't sure what it was. Maybe it was the accumulated weight of 3 years of struggling alone. Maybe it was the humiliation of being treated like garbage in front of her neighbors. Maybe it was the thought of her kids inside the house, watching through the window as their mother was degraded by a man who was supposed to protect people. Whatever it was, Rosa felt something shift deep in her chest, something that had been buried under layers of exhaustion and resignation and fear. She felt anger, pure, white-hot, righteous anger. Callahan finally turned off the hose, still laughing, his face red from the exertion. "How's that for clean?" he said, tossing the hose aside. "Now maybe this place won't look like such a dump." Rosa stood there, dripping wet, her hair plastered to her face, her clothes clinging to her skin. She was shaking, but not from the cold. She looked at Callahan, really looked at him, and she saw exactly what he was. A bully with a badge, a coward who picked on people who couldn't fight back because it made him feel powerful. And in that moment, Rosa made a decision. She walked into her house without saying a word. Callahan watched her go, a satisfied smirk still on his face. He figured that was the end of it. He'd put her in her place, reminded her who was in charge, and now he could go back to his patrol feeling like the king of the world. He climbed back into his car, ready to drive off, when he saw Rosa emerge from the house. She was holding something in her hands. At first, Callahan couldn't tell what it was. It looked like a folder, maybe some papers. He rolled his window down, curious despite himself. Rosa walked slowly toward his car, her steps measured and deliberate. The anger was still there, burning in her chest, but she'd wrapped it in something colder now, something more controlled. When she reached his window, she looked down at him with an expression he'd never seen on her face before. "You made a mistake," she said quietly. Callahan laughed. "Oh yeah? And what mistake is that?" Rosa opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. She held it up so he could see it clearly. "Your mistake was thinking I was just some helpless woman you could push around." Callahan's smile faltered. The photograph showed him standing outside a house in a different part of town, a house Rosa knew belonged to a woman named Sandra, who was married to a police sergeant. But Callahan wasn't there on official business. He was there at 2 in the morning, and the photograph captured him kissing Sandra on the porch, his hands on her waist, her arms around his neck. The timestamp in the corner of the photo read 3 weeks ago. "Where did you get that?" Callahan said, and his voice had gone very quiet. Rosa pulled out another photograph. This one showed Callahan sitting in his patrol car in an empty parking lot, counting a thick stack of cash. Standing outside the car was a man Rosa recognized from the news, a known drug dealer who'd been arrested twice but never convicted. The timestamp on this photo was from 5 months ago. Callahan's face had gone pale. "You've been following me?" "No," Rosa said, and there was no satisfaction in her voice, only a cold, hard resolve. "But someone has. Someone who's been watching you for a very long time. Someone who knew exactly what kind of man you were and decided to document it. And they sent these to me 2 days ago." She pulled out more photographs. Callahan accepting an envelope from a man outside a strip club. Callahan parked outside Sandra's house again. this time in the middle of the day. Callahan asleep in his patrol car during his shift, his duty belt unbuckled, an open bottle of whiskey on the passenger seat. Callahan in a bar, clearly drunk, his arm around a woman who wasn't Sandra, his wedding ring conspicuously absent from his finger. I didn't know what to do with these, Rosa continued, her voice steady despite the rage still coursing through her veins. I thought maybe I should just throw them away. Maybe I should mind my own business and let you keep being the piece of trash you are. But then you came here today. You sprayed me with a hose like I was some kind of animal. You humiliated me in front of my neighbors, in front of my children, and you laughed about it. Callahan was staring at the photographs, his mouth slightly open, his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles had turned white. Who gave you those? Does it matter? Rosa asked. What matters is what I'm going to do with them now. She pulled out a flash drive from her pocket and held it up. There are videos too, hours of them. You taking bribes, you sleeping with Sandra while her husband was on duty, you drinking on the job, you falsifying reports, you harassing people who couldn't fight back. It's all here, everything. Callahan's breath was coming faster now, and there was genuine fear in his eyes. You can't do this. You don't know what you're messing with. Actually, Rosa said, and for the first time there was a hint of something that might have been satisfaction in her voice. I know exactly what I'm messing with. I'm messing with your career, your marriage, your freedom. Because all of this is going to the FBI, to internal affairs, to every news station in the state, and to Sandra's husband. And you know what the best part is? Callahan just stared at her, speechless. The best part is that you did this to yourself, Rosa said. Every single thing on this flash drive, every photograph, every video, you did. Nobody set you up. Nobody framed you. You just assumed you were untouchable, that nobody was watching, that nobody cared. And now you're going to pay for it. She turned and started walking back toward her house. Behind her, she heard Callahan scramble out of his patrol car, heard his footsteps on the pavement as he ran after her. Wait, he said, and his voice was desperate now, all the arrogance stripped away. Wait, please, we can work this out. We can make a deal. Rosa stopped but didn't turn around. What kind of deal? I'll leave you alone, Callahan said quickly. I'll never bother you again. I'll make sure nobody else bothers you either. I'll even help you. I can make sure your landlord backs off. Make sure you don't have any trouble with code enforcement or anything like that. Just don't send those files. Please. Rosa turned slowly, and the look on her face made Callahan take a step back. You think I want your help? You think I want anything from you except for you to face the consequences of what you've done? You don't understand, Callahan said, and now there was genuine panic in his voice. If those files go public, I'll lose everything. My job, my pension, my family. I'll go to prison. You'll destroy my life. Good, Rosa said simply. You destroyed mine a little bit every time you pulled up to my house and made me feel afraid. You destroyed the lives of everyone else you bullied and robbed and lied to. Why should your life be any different? Callahan fell to his knees right there on the sidewalk, and Rosa realized with a shock that he was crying. This man who had terrorized her for months, who had just humiliated her in front of her entire neighborhood, was on his knees sobbing like a child. Please, he begged, his voice breaking. I'll do anything. Anything you want. I have money saved up. I can give you $50,000 right now. Just don't send those files, please, I'm begging you. Rosa looked down at him and she felt nothing. No pity, no triumph, just a cold, empty certainty that justice was about to be served. I don't want your money, she said. I want you to understand what it feels like to be powerless, to be at someone else's mercy, to beg for something you know you don't deserve. I understand, Callahan said desperately. I understand now. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything I did to you. I was wrong. I was so wrong. You're not sorry for what you did, Rosa said quietly. You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference. She walked into her house and closed the door behind her, leaving Callahan kneeling on the sidewalk. Inside, her mother was standing in the hallway with Mia and Carlos, all three of them staring at her with wide eyes. Mama, you're all wet, Carlos said, his voice small and worried. Rosa looked down at herself, at her dripping clothes and the puddle forming on the floor beneath her. She started to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh, but it wasn't entirely bitter either. It was the laugh of someone who had just walked through fire and come out the other side still standing. "I'm okay, baby," she said, pulling both her children into a hug. "Mama's okay." Her mother looked at her with knowing eyes. "What did you do, mija?" Rosa met her gaze steadily. "What I should have done a long time ago." The next morning, Rosa woke up before dawn and made copies of everything. She uploaded the files to 3 different cloud storage accounts. She burned everything onto multiple DVDs. She created several anonymous email accounts and prepared messages to send to every relevant authority she could think of. And then, with her mother watching the kids and her hands remarkably steady, she hit send. The files went to the FBI field office. They went to the State Police Internal Affairs Division. They went to the county prosecutor. They went to 3 different television news stations. They went to 2 newspapers. And they went to Sergeant Thomas Hendricks, Sandra's husband, with a note that simply said, "I'm sorry you have to see this, but you deserve to know the truth." Then Rosa went to work. She cleaned Mrs. Patterson's house like she did every Monday, scrubbing and dusting and pretending everything was normal. She went to her shift at Mel's Diner and served coffee with a smile, pocketing her tips and laughing at the regulars' jokes. She picked up her kids from school and helped them with their homework. She made dinner, gave them baths, read them stories, and tucked them into bed. And she waited. The first call came Tuesday afternoon. It was from a detective with the FBI who identified himself as Special Agent Marcus Chen. He was polite, professional, and wanted to know if she could come in for an interview. Rosa said yes. She called her mother to watch the kids, put on her nicest dress, and drove to the federal building downtown. Agent Chen was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and the demeanor of someone who'd seen everything twice. He sat Rosa down in a small interview room, offered her coffee, and then asked her to tell him everything she knew about Officer Derek Callahan. Rosa told him everything. She described months of harassment, the late-night visits, the intimidation, the way Callahan had made her feel unsafe in her own home. She described the incident with the hose, the humiliation, the fear. She explained how she'd received the files, though she was careful not to reveal her source. She didn't actually know who had sent them to her, and that was the truth. They'd arrived in a manila envelope with no return address, with a note that said only, "Use these wisely." Agent Chen listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled under his chin. "Ms. Martinez," he said finally, "I want you to know that we've been investigating Officer Callahan for the past 6 months. We had some evidence of corruption, but nothing concrete enough to move forward with charges. What you've provided us with is going to change that. These files are going to bring down not just Callahan, but several other officers in his precinct who've been running their own little criminal enterprise for years." Rosa felt something loosen in her chest. "So he's going to face charges?" "Oh yes," Agent Chen said, and there was a grim satisfaction in his voice. "He's going to face multiple felony charges: bribery, extortion, theft, falsifying official documents, conducting an extramarital affair with the spouse of a fellow officer, and about a dozen other things we're still working through. He's looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison, and that's if he takes a plea deal." "Good," Rosa said quietly. Agent Chen leaned forward. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Did you or anyone acting on your behalf illegally obtain these files? Did you break any laws in gathering this evidence?" Rosa met his gaze without flinching. "No, everything was sent to me anonymously. I didn't ask for it. I didn't pay for it. I didn't even know it existed until it showed up at my door. All I did was decide what to do with it once I had it." Agent Chen studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, here's what's going to happen. We're going to need you to testify when this goes to trial. You'll be provided with protection if you need it, though I don't think that will be necessary. Callahan isn't part of any organized crime group. He's just a corrupt cop who thought he was smarter than everyone else. We'll also need you to sign some documents, and we'll probably have a few more interviews as we build the case. Can you do that?" "Yes," Rosa said without hesitation. "One more thing," Agent Chen said, and now there was something that might have been approval in his expression. What you did took courage. A lot of people in your position would have been too afraid to come forward, even with evidence like this. You should be proud of yourself. Rosa didn't feel proud. She felt exhausted and nervous and like she might throw up at any moment, but she nodded and thanked him anyway. The news broke that evening. It was the lead story on every local channel. Police officer arrested on multiple federal charges. They showed footage of Callahan being let out of his house in handcuffs, his face hidden behind his hands, his wife screaming at the officers. They interviewed neighbors who all claimed they'd always known something was off about him. They showed a press conference with the FBI and the county prosecutor, both promising a full investigation and justice for all of Callahan's victims. Rosa watched it all from her couch with her mother beside her and her children asleep in their rooms. When her phone rang and she saw it was a reporter asking for comment, she turned it off. She didn't want to talk to anyone. She just wanted to sit in her quiet house and let the weight of the past few days settle over her. "You did good, mija," her mother said softly, squeezing her hand. Rosa wasn't sure if that was true. She didn't feel like she'd done anything good. She felt like she'd just survived something terrible and come out the other side damaged but intact. But maybe that was enough. The next few weeks were a blur. The story exploded beyond the local news and went national. Rosa became, much to her horror, a minor celebrity. People wanted to interview her, to hear her story, to make her into some kind of hero. She declined every request. She didn't want fame. She just wanted to go back to her normal life, to clean houses and wait tables and raise her kids without looking over her shoulder constantly. But normal wasn't quite in the cards yet. Sandra Hendricks showed up at Rosa's door 3 weeks after the story broke. She was a thin woman with blonde hair and red-rimmed eyes, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Rosa almost didn't open the door, but something in Sandra's expression made her reconsider. "I need to talk to you," Sandra said, her voice hoarse. Rosa let her in and made coffee, and they sat at the small kitchen table in silence for a long moment before Sandra finally spoke. "I didn't know he was harassing you," she said quietly. "Derek, I mean. He never talked about his job at home, never mentioned your name. If I'd known what he was doing, what kind of person he really was, I never would have—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Rosa didn't say anything. She just waited. "I want to apologize," Sandra continued, her hands wrapped around the coffee mug like it was the only thing keeping her anchored. "Not just for the affair, though that was wrong and I know it destroyed my marriage, but for not seeing what Derek was, for not realizing that if he was capable of lying to me, of sneaking around behind my husband's back, he was probably capable of a lot worse. I should have known." "You couldn't have known," Rosa said, surprising herself with the gentleness in her voice. "People like him are good at hiding who they really are. That's how they get away with it for so long." Sandra looked up at her, tears streaming down her face. "My husband left me. He took our kids and moved out, and I don't blame him. I destroyed our family for a man who was using me, who was using everyone around him. I lost everything." Rosa felt a complicated swirl of emotions. Part of her wanted to feel vindicated, to take satisfaction in Sandra's suffering the way Sandra had, however unknowingly, contributed to hers. But mostly she just felt tired. Tired of anger, tired of pain, tired of the endless cycle of people hurting each other. "I'm sorry that happened to you," Rosa said, and she meant it. "But I can't absolve you. That's not my place. You have to live with what you did, just like everyone else." Sandra nodded, wiping her eyes. "I know. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, for whatever that's worth." After Sandra left, Rosa sat at her kitchen table for a long time, staring at nothing. Her mother came in eventually and put a hand on her shoulder. "You okay, mija?" Rosa thought about it. Was she okay? She was still broke, still working 2 jobs, still struggling to make ends meet. Her house still had a leaky sink and a cracked window. Her landlord was still threatening eviction, though he'd backed off a bit since the news coverage. Her kids still needed new shoes and winter coats and school supplies she couldn't quite afford. Nothing in her practical situation had changed, but something inside her had changed. She'd stood up to a bully and won. She'd taken a risk and it had paid off. She'd been scared and angry and desperate, and instead of letting those feelings crush her, she'd channeled them into action. She'd proven to herself that she wasn't helpless, that she wasn't invisible, that her life and her dignity mattered. "Yeah," Rosa said finally, "I think I am." The trial happened 6 months later. Callahan's lawyers tried everything they could think of to get the charges dismissed or the evidence suppressed, but nothing worked. The files Rosa had received were legally obtained by someone, even if that someone's identity remained unknown. The chain of custody was clean. The evidence was overwhelming. Rosa testified on a Thursday afternoon in a courthouse downtown that smelled like floor wax and old wood. She wore the same dress she'd worn to the FBI interview, and she kept her answers short and factual. She described the harassment, the intimidation, the incident with the hose. She identified Callahan sitting at the defense table, looking nothing like the arrogant bully who'd tormented her for months. He looked small now, diminished, his face pale and his shoulders hunched. When the prosecutor asked her how the harassment had made her feel, Rosa paused. She could have given a simple answer. She could have said she felt scared or angry or violated, but instead she told the truth. "He made me feel like I didn't matter," she said quietly, "like I was less than human, like my life and my struggles and my children were just entertainment for him. He made me feel powerless, and that's the worst feeling in the world." The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found Derek Callahan guilty on all counts. At the sentencing hearing, 2 months later, Rosa sat in the gallery and watched as the judge handed down the sentence. 18 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 12 years. Restitution to be paid to all identified victims. Permanent loss of his law enforcement certification. Forfeiture of his pension. Callahan's mother sobbed in the front row. His wife, who had filed for divorce 3 days after his arrest, sat stone-faced and silent. His lawyer made a last-ditch appeal for leniency, arguing that his client had made mistakes but didn't deserve to have his entire life destroyed. The judge, a gray-haired woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, was unmoved. "Mr. Callahan," she said, looking directly at the man standing before her, "you were given a badge and a gun and the public's trust, and you violated all three. You used your position to harass, intimidate, and steal from the people you were sworn to protect. You showed no mercy to your victims, no remorse for your actions, and no respect for the law you claim to uphold. Therefore, this court will show you the same level of mercy you showed them. None." She banged her gavel, and it was over. Rosa left the courthouse feeling strangely empty. She thought she'd feel triumphant, vindicated, satisfied, but mostly she just felt done. The chapter was closed. The monster had been slain. Now she could get back to the business of living her life. But life had other plans. 3 days after the sentencing, Rosa received a call from a lawyer named Patricia Winters. Patricia explained that several of Callahan's victims had filed a civil lawsuit against him and the police department, seeking damages for the harassment and emotional distress they'd suffered. Did Rosa want to join the lawsuit? Rosa thought about it for exactly 10 seconds before saying yes. The civil case took another year to resolve, but when it finally did, Rosa received a settlement check for $250,000. The police department, desperate to avoid further bad publicity and more lawsuits, had agreed to a substantial payout to all of Callahan's victims. Other victims received different amounts depending on what they'd suffered, but Rosa's payment, the lawyer explained, was one of the largest because her case had been so well documented and so egregious. Rosa stared at the check for a long time, not quite believing it was real. $250,000. It was more money than she'd seen in her entire life, more money than she'd ever imagined having. It was enough to pay off her debts, to fix up her house, to buy her kids new clothes and shoes and toys, to maybe even take a vacation, something they'd never done. But more than that, it was freedom. It was the ability to quit one of her jobs, to spend more time with her children, to not live in constant fear of the next emergency that would drain her bank account dry. It was stability. It was security. It was the chance to breathe. She called her mother first, then her sister, then her best friend. They all cried together on the phone, laughing and sobbing and talking over each other. That evening, Rosa took her kids out for ice cream, and when Carlos asked if they could get 2 scoops instead of 1, She said yes without hesitation. "Why are you so happy, Mama?" Mia asked, chocolate ice cream smeared across her face. Rosa looked at her daughter, at her son, at the life she'd fought so hard to protect, and she felt something swell in her chest that she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. "Because we're going to be okay, baby," she said. "Better than okay. We're going to be just fine." And they were. Rosa quit her job at the diner and kept only the house cleaning work, which gave her better hours and more time at home. She used some of the settlement money to make repairs on her house, fixing the sink and the window and repainting the walls in bright, cheerful colors. She put money aside for her children's education, opened college savings accounts for both of them. She paid off her car and her credit cards and every other debt that had been hanging over her head like a storm cloud. And slowly, carefully, she started to rebuild her life. She joined a support group for victims of police misconduct and found a community of people who understood what she'd been through. She volunteered at a local legal aid clinic, helping other people navigate the complex system of filing complaints and seeking justice. She became an advocate, speaking at community meetings and police oversight hearings, telling her story so that others might find the courage to tell theirs. She never set out to be a hero. She never wanted fame or recognition or to have her face on the news. She just wanted to live her life with dignity and raise her children in peace. But in standing up for herself, she'd shown others that it was possible to fight back against corruption and abuse of power. She'd proven that the system, as broken and imperfect as it was, could still deliver justice if people were brave enough to demand it. 3 years after the hose incident, Rosa received an invitation to speak at a national conference on police reform. She almost declined, still uncomfortable with public speaking in the spotlight, but her mother convinced her to go. "Your story matters, mija," her mother said. "The people who need to hear it won't hear it if you stay silent." So Rosa went. She stood on a stage in front of 500 people and told them everything. She told them about the fear, the humiliation, the moment she'd decided she'd had enough. She told them about the photographs and the flash drive, and the way Callahan had fallen to his knees and begged. She told them about the trial and the settlement and the slow process of putting her life back together. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. People stood. Some were crying. Rosa stood at the podium, overwhelmed and uncertain, until a woman in the front row caught her eye and mouthed the words, "Thank you." Rosa nodded. And for the first time since this whole thing started, she felt genuinely proud of what she'd done. That evening, back in her hotel room, Rosa called her kids to say goodnight. They told her about their day, about school and friends, and the new video game Carlos wanted. They sounded happy. They sounded safe. And Rosa realized that was all she'd ever really wanted. She also realized something else. She wasn't the same person who'd knelt on those concrete steps 3 years ago, scrubbing and hoping the world would leave her alone. That woman had been scared and broken and barely holding on. The woman she was now was stronger, braver, more certain of her own worth. She'd been forged in fire and come out tempered steel. Callahan was still in prison. He'd serve at least 9 more years before he was even eligible for parole. Sandra had moved to another state, trying to rebuild her life away from the scandal. Sergeant Hendricks had retired early and was raising his kids alone, trying to heal from the betrayal. The police department had implemented new oversight measures and fired several other corrupt officers who'd been caught in the wider investigation. The world had moved on, as it always did, but the ripples of that one Saturday afternoon, of one woman's refusal to be treated like she didn't matter, continued to spread outward. Rosa went back to her regular life. She cleaned houses and packed lunches and helped with homework. She went to parent-teacher conferences and soccer games and school plays. She laughed with her friends and argued with her mother about trivial things and complained about the rising cost of groceries. She lived. But every now and then, usually late at night when the house was quiet and her children were asleep, Rosa would think back to that moment when she'd stood in front of Callahan's patrol car with those photographs in her hands. She'd think about the fear in his eyes, the desperation in his voice, the way he'd fallen to his knees and beg for mercy. And she'd think about how she'd given him exactly the same amount of mercy he'd shown her. None. She didn't regret it. Not for a second. Because justice wasn't always about forgiveness or redemption or giving people second chances. Sometimes justice was simply about making sure that people who hurt others faced the consequences of their actions. Sometimes justice was about standing up and saying no more, and meaning it with every fiber of your being. Rosa had done that. She'd stood up. She'd fought back. She'd won. And in doing so, she'd changed not just her own life, but the lives of everyone Callahan had victimized. Everyone who'd been too afraid to speak up. Everyone who'd been told their suffering didn't matter. She'd shown them all that one person, even someone with no power or money or connections, could make a difference. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Let me know what you think of this story in the comments section. Thank you for watching. Like this video and subscribe to my channel.